Hi, welcome to the Module 2 of the Data Migration Framework course. I am Rupesh Desai, your trainer for this course and the author of the book Data Migration Framework. While the first foundational component helps you to figure out the correct quantity of legacy data necessary for the migration, the following foundational component focuses on the logical partition of the legacy data within the migration scope. In order to orchestrate the right order of the data migration with the due diligence activities to comply with the regulations and policies while migrating the data. Critical business applications such as ERPs and CRMs from different vendors within the same domain, that is healthcare or finance, they may differ in their features, but the underlying data of any application can be seen in two logical segments, that is master data and transactional data. You cannot capture transactional data in business application until the master data is available. Data transformation code generated for the legacy data migration is nothing but the expression of how data structure of these two types of data are mapped between the legacy source system and the new target system. Let's look at the properties of master data first, followed by the transactional data. Master data, for instance, includes data about customers, patients, products, stores, employees, services, or device locations, and many more that represent core entities crucial to conducting a business transaction. Master data facilitates the foundational detail that form the basis of any business operation. Such data stays relatively stable with a lower frequency of change. For example, you don't update a customer or patient address or phone number every week in your system. Neither you change product prices daily. To capture data about a cell in business system, you need the customer and product already in the system. Therefore, customer and product data are master data. Along with the core business entities, master data also include referential data, such as lookup values for gender codes, product categories, locations, wards, beds, a list of health services provided at a hospital, and a list of business units or departments. Such referential data also tend to change less frequently and is essential for configuring a business system. For example, in a hospital setup, you need to load all wards and the location of beds in the new hospital management system before it can be operationalized. Therefore, I see such referential and configurational data as a type of master data for data migration. Unlike patients and customer, referential or configurational data are not always subject to migration. They can be manually loaded into the target system as a part of the configuration task. However, correct and approved mapping of the old to new codes is a key ingredient for data migration code. On the other hand, transactional data represent a business transaction, such as a sales order, a quotation, medical appointment, or waiting list entry in hospital. When defining the scope of data migration, we are actually addressing the amount of past and current business transactions worth migrating to the new system. Data about core business entities automatically becomes part of the data migration scope if they are involved in the past and current business transactions. In my first data migration project in healthcare, the scope of the migration was all patients and activities associated with referral received in the last 7 financial years from the cutover date. I derived a unique list of patient identifiers from the referral data to figure out the precise number of patients that should be part of the migration. So, I derived the amount of master data to be migrated from the, from the transactional data in the scope. Transactional data typically involves relationships with other master data and transactional data. For example, a sales order is associated with multiple products, a specific customer, and a designated salesperson. In the healthcare environment, an outpatient visit can be a quarterly follow up visit after a surgery which was scheduled from a waiting list. These critical relationships in business transactions captured in the past must be accurately identified and maintained during the data migration process to ensure that the integrity of these relationships remain intact and functional in the new system. Now that we have looked what is master data and transactional data, let's look at their logical order of migration. Data migration between applications is executed as multiple test iterations before the actual cutover date. I cover how to plan for test iterations in the next module, but for now, I want to highlight that your data migration plan should propose to migrate the master data first in the initial test runs. For example, migrate the product and customer data first, followed by the historical and the current sales order. Or migrate patients and wards first before migrating inpatient visit. The approach to migrate the master data first should also include the necessary mapping between the referential data, such as product categories and genders. Data migration for retiring legacy systems is an old age problem. Is there from last 3-4 decades. And therefore, we have a lot of research papers around this. And I found all of them that recommends migrating the master data first. In fact, I have cited all these papers in my book that recommend this approach. And it's a logical approach because you cannot have transactional data before you have master data, right? So therefore, migrate the master data. Let's look at the advantages of migrating the master data first. First of all, when you do data migration, you map your source system or the source data structure with the data structure of the target system. Now, the new system can have new business processes, new data structures, which is completely missing from the source system. And therefore, you have significant gap between the data structure of these two systems. When you migrate the master data first, when you deal with the core entities of the business, such significant gaps in the showstoppers will come out early on. I give you an example from my own experience. During my first project in healthcare, the target system had referrals for inpatients as well. An inpatient booking must have a referral that why this patient needs an inpatient booking. Right? A referral is that key thing. With the source system, it was not there. It was the referrals are not associated with the inpatient visit. It was associated only with the outpatient visit. So we had that big gap and that we could not migrate inpatient data because there is no referral number and there is no referral in the first place. The solution was to create dummy referrals on the fly as a workaround. Now, implementing that workaround was really easy through ETL code. But bringing all the stakeholders on one solution and informing the data management teams about the implications of this workaround on the downstream integration and how they can ignore this dummy referrals, that was quite an exercise. However, in hindsight, it was dealt really early on the project. It was not parked for the last minute just before the go live. So when you deal with the core entities of the business early on, certain obvious showstoppers and gaps will be highlighted, and you will have enough time to deal with them. It's not only a technical solution, you would need to involve different stakeholders in order to create a workaround or create a solution, or sometimes it can create into a change request for the vendor as well. The second advantage is, I'm not saying that migrating transactional data is simple, but if you deal with the master data, you build the process, you build the ETLs, or you build a data migration process using a specialized tool, and you do all the groundwork early on. And that way, when it comes to migrating the transactional data, most of the key things are done, and it won't take a long time to migrate the transactional data. And it also involves mappings of this referential data that you would do while migrating the master data. And each of these key exercises or key activities that you have done during migrating master data will be really handy when it comes to transaction data. You would have a lot of things already done, and it would be just simple mapping, and it will be quick exercise. Another key advantage of migrating the master data first is that it can enable you to do data migration testing from early on. Think about this. You're not going to replace an hospital management system with a manufacturing system, right? The domain is same. Legacy hospital management system would have patients and doctor, same as the target system would have patients and doctor, because they are the core entities, the master data. So when you start migrating those master data, you can actually test them early on. You can migrate, let's say, 1,000 patients in the new system, and you can see how they look like, where they appear, which screen on they appear, is that data looks accurate. So this kind of smaller iterations of the test run can really build confidence in your data migration process, and can also highlight some gap really early on in your process. So that's another advantage. One more thing to consider here is, it is also possible that now you have identified your master data and you're starting with the master data. It's not necessary that only your source system can provide master data. Let me explain how. You have a system running from last 20 years. It's an old legacy system, but you also have a data warehouse, which is there from last 5-6 years, and you have a really good process that extract the data from the source system, and it has a really good dimensions with the clean data, high quality data. You can think about getting your master data from the data warehouse rather than the source system. You can also have some secondary system which is partially doing some business operations, and it has all the data that you need from the legacy system. And in fact, that secondary system have better means to provide the data and better quality of data. So yes, when you segregate your migration into master and transaction, for the master data specifically, you can think of different source of truth for that. So these are the advantages of migrating the master data first. So far in this training, we looked at the logical segment of the legacy data, that is master data and transactional data, and why you should migrate the master data first. We are now going to look into another critical area in this component, which is compliance adherence. You must be recalling that we have looked into compliances in the first foundational component as well. But that was about the compliances around data retention, data archival. Whereas in this component, we're going to look into compliances around this 4 type of data. If you're dealing with this 4 type of data, which involves your PII, personal identifiable information, financially sensitive data, or health records, or even educational records. Most of the laws and regulation around the data involve these four type of categories. And within your migration scope, if you are dealing with one of this type of data, I would highly recommend you to involve your legal and compliance team really early on in the project to make sure that you are you are not violating any rules, you're not violating any policies or laws, right? Especially in those cases where the vendor of the target system would offer services of managed data migration, where they will ask you to give them everything, give them the whole backup of the legacy system database, and they will do the magic after that. That's an easy approach, but if you're going that way, please consult your legal team and make sure that you have controls uh, and guidelines with your vendor that how they will ensure that once the migration is done, they will destroy the legacy data. Otherwise, you'll be violating a lot of different policies and laws. You can leverage your data migration plan here to ensure that no data migration activity will violate any particular compliance. Especially if you are in a regulatory sensitive environment, you might already have data classification and policies. What you need to do is list all the data segments, list all the policies and regulation applied on those data segments, and then what kind of control you should put in the ETL, or what kind of contractual obligation you can have with your vendor that ensures no law or policy is violated during the data migration. Also note that sometimes vendor provide data migration as managed services, where they take the entire backup of your source system or the source database and they do the magic at their end. It's an easy way, it's a good way, and you sort of outsource all the risk. But make sure you have right contractual agreement with your vendor, involve your legal team, and ensure that once the job is done, the vendor will destroy the legacy data. Otherwise, you'll be violating privacy laws and God knows many different laws and regulations. So if anything sounds too easy, double check, triple check. I hope you feel empowered now to define a logical order of data migration and put the right controls to prevent any violation of compliances. And as we looked into the first component, we have a set of questions here as well for your project. In this particular data segment component, you need to figure out the answers for these questions for your project. Take a look. I hope you will be able to find right answers for your project as well. Thank you so much for participating in this training, and please continue on the next video in this module that is about the last component of the foundational segment called people and technology.